My name is Lori Cardoza-Moore, and I'm the president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. Our mission as an organization is to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel. And now, to defend Christians. I want to remind you all that PJTN hosts this event every year, this press briefing, where we bring in the leading experts on these issues that Israel is facing. And we supply all of this information for you so that you will take this message to your sphere of audience. We watched the evening news, and for those of you who were here last night and heard our comments, you know, I mentioned last night that we all feel overwhelmed. We watch the news that's unfolding on our TV screens, and we wonder if there is any hope of salvaging this country, of defending Israel. And the only hope out there is if we can mobilize and organize people of faith, both Christians and Jews, to stand against this existential threat that we face. We have Jews and Christians being slaughtered in the Middle East. And the Obama administration has now decided to join with the BDS movement by boycotting Bibi Netanyahu when he comes to speak before Congress on March 3rd. The Obama administration is supporting UN sanctions against Israel. We're hearing rumors now coming out about this administration. We also are hearing that he's trying to block Congress from approving sanctions against Iran. Thank God we have a Congress that still their resolve is firm in standing with Israel. But Congress's resolve is only going to be as firm as we, the people, make sure that they stay committed. And that's why the Christian media is so critically important. You all have the responsibility, we as Christian communicators have the responsibility to biblically uphold God's covenant and his promise to Israel. And so we've invited you all here to cover these stories, to introduce you to these experts. We're going to give our panelists 10 minutes to speak. They're going to talk on all related topics, but from various perspectives. And then following their statements, we're also going to have a time of Q&A so that you can ask some questions. And we will wrap up this program by 12. So I'm going to encourage our panelists to keep their comments to 10 minutes. And I want to invite our first panelist to the podium, a man who needs no introduction. We all love him dearly. He's truly the Churchill of our time. Please help me welcome Ambassador John Bolton.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here at the convention and to participate with PJTN and the work that it does, the very valuable work that it does about Israel, the U.S.-Israel relationship, and the threats that both Israel and the United States and others around the world face today. And really, I think the picture that we need to understand from a geostrategic point of view is that threats in the Middle East and North Africa have been moving very rapidly in the past couple of years from a series of discrete challenges, country by country, to a growing sense of chaos and anarchy as these crises bleed together. And the threats and the disorder that we see emanating from that part of the world imperil everybody there who's a friend of the United States, Israel, friendly Arab governments, and risks spreading all around the world. We have seen it tragically here in our own country, obviously not just September the 11th, 2001, but beginning with the first World Trade Center bombing, terrorist attacks against Americans and American institutions around the world. Now we see it in Europe. It was entirely predictable, but the attacks against Charlie Hebdo in Paris, the attack against the kosher grocery store, the attacks in Copenhagen, attacks in Great Britain, attacks in Sydney, Australia, in Ottawa, Canada. And I'm afraid that there's a lot more to come. All of these threats that we see really emanate from a global rise of radical Islamicism. It's a phenomenon that we've seen growing over a number of years. When people say nobody predicted this, it's been in our face for a long time. Could you predict this or that specific incident? Almost certainly not. Should we have been aware of the rising threat really for close to 20 years now? Absolutely. And it's going to get worse. But to me, it's not just the acts of barbarism that we've seen recently, the beheadings of Westerners, including Americans, the beheading of the 21 Coptic Christians recently in Libya, the immolation of the Jordanian pilot, and according to reports out of Iraq, even more, the brutal treatment of women and children by ISIS fighters. But we've got to remember that as appalling, as horrible as all of these atrocities are, they really pale into insignificance over the long term when we look at the world's worst terrorist state, and that's the Ayatollahs in Iran, who are on the verge of getting a nuclear weapons capability and are not simply pursuing a nuclear capability, but have for these last 20 or more years been pursuing the ballistic missile launch facilities and rockets that could allow them to deliver those weapons anywhere in the world, working in conjunction with North Korea, certainly on the ballistic missile front, and with others. This is a terrorist regime. It's on our list of state sponsors of terrorism. It's an equal opportunity facilitator of terrorists, Sunni and Shia alike. It's the largest source of financial support for terrorists since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And if Iran gets nuclear weapons, not only is there obviously the threat of using these nuclear weapons against Israel, a small country which could be devastated, wiped out by a salvo of nuclear weapons from Iran, but also the impunity it would give the government of Iran against retaliation for terrorist attacks. Think back to 9/11, when our prompt and fully justified response was to overthrow the Taliban al-Qaeda government in Afghanistan. What if that government had had nuclear weapons? And a military response by the United States could have provoked a nuclear retaliation by Taliban and al-Qaeda. That is the risk we're about to face in Iran if the Ayatollahs get nuclear weapons. And given their propensity not just to finance but to arm and train terrorists, we don't need to wait for them to get ballistic missiles. They can put a nuclear device in a boxcar, they can put it on a crewed ship, they can take it off the coast of Israel, they can sail it into any American harbor, and the effect would be just as devastating as if the warhead were delivered by a missile. So this threat is imminent. The deal that I'm very much afraid the United States and the other permanent members of the Security Council are about to sign with Iran effectively legitimizes Iran's claim to be able to enrich uranium. That's the long pole in the tent in any nuclear proliferator's program. That's the hardest thing to do. And the entire structure of the agreement, as the administration continues to leak it out day by day, is a demonstration that we've already made the fundamental concessions to Iran. We've conceded they have a right to a peaceful nuclear program, despite the fact that for close to 30 years now, they've already violated their solemn obligation under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty not to seek nuclear weapons. So since they've already violated the word they gave decades ago, what possible reason is there to think they'll keep their word now when they say they're going to give up their nuclear weapons program, or what they've already said, that they've never had one, which is manifestly untrue. So I think the message here for those who are concerned about Israel, who are concerned about the U.S.-Israel relationship, who are concerned about the safety of the United States and all of our friends in the region and globally, is that the pace and the scope of the challenges that we will face from terrorists, from their state sponsors, from other adversaries around the world, whether in Moscow or Beijing, who seek to take advantage of American weakness, that we're in a very dangerous time. And it requires, in my view, a national debate in the United States about what our presence in the world should be, resting on the belief that whatever minimal order and stability there has been in the world since the end of World War II has come from the strength of the United States and its system of alliances. As we withdraw from the world, as we pay less attention, as we're less confident that we are a benign force in the world, the more likely it is that our adversaries and those who wish us and our friends ill will take advantage of it. So it's not a happy message, but that, I think, is what we're required to understand so that we can take the appropriate measures. That's why we need a national debate, which I hope will take place in the context of the 2016 campaign that's already begun. Thank you very much.
For the sake of space, I'm going to ask Pastor Mark Biltz to start, and you know what? You won't have to come to the podium. We'll just keep it, if you'll go ahead and make your comments from your seat. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Lori. Thank you very much, Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, for having me here. I think we live in very prophetic times. We really do. One of the things that I like to look at is patterns, and the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu was going to be speaking to Congress the day before the fast of Esther, right before Purim, I think needs to be acknowledged. I think this is very significant when you realize the book of Esther is all about an Iranian madman or Persian madman who wants to kill the Jewish people. So I think there's great prophetic significance here. The other thing I want to mention is in our society, we always blame the victim. And I believe what's going to be happening, I think one day we're going to wake up and Israel's going to try to defend themselves by wiping out Damascus, which could fill Isaiah 17's prophecy. But not only that, they could attack Iran, their nuclear facilities. And then what's going to happen, just like we read in the newspapers or heard on the news the other day, there are suicide bombers who maybe want to attack the Mall of America. You could end up seeing terrorist attacks all over the United States by Muslim crazies, but everyone's going to blame Israel because they always blame the victim. And so what's going to happen is they're going to say, well, if the Jews weren't here, the Muslims wouldn't be attacking us. And just like in Jonah's day, they didn't want to throw Jonah out of the boat, but they wanted to protect themselves. There could be another push to get Israel, the Jews, out of America for the same reason. Not that we don't hate the Jews, but we think that's the only way we're going to protect ourselves is the Jews are the problem. I mean, that's the mindset. We always blame the victim. And so, and that would fulfill a lot of prophecies in Jeremiah, where God says first he's going to send the fishermen to fish them back, and then he's going to send the hunters to chase them back. And so these are different prophecies that I believe we are about to be on the verge of fulfilling. But one of the things that I really want to point out prophetically is the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth is very prophetic. If you remember, you have Naomi and Elimelech. They have their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And what do? There's no bread in the house of bread, so off they go to Moabite territory. And what do we see happen? They marry these two ladies, Ruth and Orpah. I believe prophetically Ruth and Orpah represent the Gentile church who were grafted into Israel. Well, what does Ruth's name mean in Hebrew? Her name means friend. So Ruth befriends the Jew, goes to Israel, works the harvest. It says from the barley harvest to the wheat harvest, which is from Passover to Shavuot or Pentecost. And we know through Ruth, we end up coming with King David. And the Messiah is going to be through King David. What do we know about Orpah? Orpah, her name means to turn your back on, the back of the neck. And what does Orpah do? She gives a peck on the cheek to Naomi, and off she goes, the scripture says, back to her pagan gods. So what I see happening is if you realize Orpah and Ruth represent the Gentile church grafted into Israel, in these last days, you're going to see a gigantic dividing line within the church between the Ruths who befriend Israel, work the harvest, and bring forth the Messiah, and the Orphans in the church who turn their back on Israel and go back to the one world church, the pagan gods. And what's fascinating is prophetically, we know through Ruth comes David. In Jewish history, Orpah, through her came Goliath. And so here we see this giant David and Goliath battle coming prophetically in these last days that will be within the church between those who support Israel and between those who turn their back on Israel. So in these last days, these days that we're in, I'm so grateful for PJTN. I believe they're at the forefront. They're like the Davids of this day. And we really need to support Israel if we're going to want to be a part of what God is doing in these last days.
Thank you, Pastor Mark. Well said. I'd like to introduce you to Rabbi Jonathan Hausman. Rabbi, you have the floor for 10 minutes. 10. 10, Rabbi.
10 minutes? 10 minutes.
10 minutes. I got my stopwatch going.
My wife doesn't give me 10 minutes. You know, my friends, I am just a small-town rabbi. And I certainly don't have my finger on the pulse of the political world like the ambassador does. But there is, if there's anything I know, it's this. That the demise of America and the demise of Western civilization is proceeding apace without much resistance. And there could be, you can ascribe many reasons to it. For me, it's very simple. It comes down to evangelical atheism. Now, I didn't make up the term. Professor Paul Eidelberg out of Israel has coined the term. But what it really refers to is this, that our most cherished values are being undermined. And those values are being undermined from a variety of sources. I have a child who's in the university right now. I can tell you that the academy doesn't really treat her very well because of this constant barrage of moral relativism, which denies any and all moral truths. It would seem that the German philosophers of the late 19th century truly have won. And how often do I hear the college students at my own congregation come back and say, you know, something with this mindless adage, I would think, you know, I'm okay, you're okay. And this nihilism is incurring in the midst of a war that is being waged against Western civilization. I'm interested in comparative theology and doctrine. And you can't fight a war if you're not allowed to describe the war in the enemy's own terms. And while a lot of people don't want to use the I word, I will tell you, from my point of view, doctrinal Islam causes a lot of problems. And instead of poring over the texts, the sacralized texts, we have our leaders out playing golf. Playing golf. And intoning such insipid phrases like, we are not at war with Islam. Or 9/11 might never have happened, but for. Or ignoring former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's ever gleeful riposte, death to America. As the ambassador said last night, not in these words, but Ambassador, this is what I took from your comments. My friends, it's time to sober up. Have we been so corrupted with the compliance of moral relativism that we don't allow ourselves to put our fingers on the pulse of what's taking place? Do our kids come back corrupted by academic doctrine, of cultural relativism? I come from a tradition that teaches us to distinguish between good and evil and to call it what it is. And how many people can't do that these days? An inability to uphold, I would say, not just Judeo-Christian values, but American values. Has this will to do so been completely eviscerated by this moral and cultural relativism? And have Christians and Jews in this country and around the world been so demoralized as to think that it is politically incorrect to describe ISIS decapitations of non-Muslims as evil? Did you all see the news this morning? Another 70 to 100 Assyrian Christians captured. You know what their fate will be. Their holy texts tell you what their fate will be. Or a president that quotes from the Quran a particular verse about he who saves a life saves the world entire, which happens to be a very nice Jewish concept, comes from us, by the way, okay? But he doesn't quote the following verse that tells you what a life is from their point of view. And guess what? If you're Jewish or Christian, you don't count. These are the things that I'm interested in. The gnosis of good and evil, not being purely subjective, but being objective. Having validity, objective validity. And not the academic relativism that was fostered by Nietzsche. I believe in America that cherishes its founding values. And that means Jewish and Christian life. Not a rejection of claims to objective truth. To do so will lead to degeneracy. And who's out there who has the courage to expose these degenerates for what they are without being accused of being a McCarthyite? It's a charge that was thrown at you a few times, I would think, Ambassador. And how many of us are willing to respond as the ambassador has, or I do, with just a shrug of the shoulders and say, okay, but I'm going to speak anyway? My friends, we have to be clear as to what our future is. We have to be patriotic to our respective religious traditions and cultural values. We have to speak up. We have to expose this relativism, this subversion of Western civilization. Otherwise, we will replicate the pedagogical and political decline of Rome. That much I know. And just one other thing. One other thing. A term that is bandied about, am I still within the time constraints? Oh, 2 minutes. I'll finish before that. A term is bandied about rather glibly these days. The term is terrorism. I want you to know, this is from a 7th grade textbook from their schools. What Islam is all about by Yahya Emmerich. You know this book. This is what they teach their 7th graders. There is no such thing as terrorism in Islam, nor can a Muslim ever be a fundamentalist, because there is only one way to follow Islam, the right way. And then it goes on. Never forget, they are misguided. We Muslims must never do anything to make Islam look bad as well, from our text from the Quran and the Sunnah. They teach that. What are we teaching our kids? It should not be the same message, but it should be a message of strength to confront evil.
I would like to introduce to you now Archbishop Dr. John Lapoli, who is the president of the World Council of Independent Christian Churches, whom I have the honor and privilege of representing as his special envoy at the United Nations. Archbishop, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't know what I can say. Rabbi, you were right on the money. I mean, it's just, if we could just get that message out. It is so critically important, Pastor. I'm like the second guy here, so I don't really have a whole lot to add other than to tell you that I can't speak for all the churches. I don't represent all the churches. I don't want to represent the churches. But I can represent our 83 nations. I can represent our 380,000 churches in those countries. And I can understand when they call me and they read emails and they say, we don't understand what your infatuation with Israel is. We don't understand why part of your ordination exam is so critically based upon my relationship with, or that individual's relationship with Israel. We at the WCICC believe that without Israel, there is no Christianity. Without Israel and an understanding of what we as Christians are supposed to do when it comes to Israel, you really don't have a purpose to exist. Now, a lot has been said about what's going on with Islam, what's going on in the textbooks, and I can tell you that what you're hearing on the radio, what you're hearing on the television, whether it's cable or you know, however you get your news, it doesn't matter anymore, because you're only hearing a tiny, tiny fraction of the reality that the church is completely anti-Semitic. Our efforts with Lori's group, proclaiming justice to the nations, is simply a very, very simple message. Let's go back to basics. Let's go back to Torah. Let's go back and find out what Hashem has said. Let's go back and find out what God wants us to do. But we cannot take the stand that the church is taking today in that we have no Israel. That if you mention Israel, you are somehow transforming back to an old system. We need to take replacement theology and replace it, because it is destroying the church. It is destroying our brothers and sisters in Israel. We need to recognize that the way to do this, and of course we're doing it thanks to Lori, wherever she went, we're doing it with our voice up there at the United Nations, and boy, do we take a lot of heat for our relationship at the United Nations. And it's the Christians who are attacking the church. So Israel, don't be alarmed. Christians are the only group of people on the planet that shoot their own wounded. We are not happy unless we are destructive. We are not happy unless we're critical. We're not happy unless we have something negative to say about somebody else. We need to forget about all of that. You're going to be judged based upon your relationship with Him. You're going to be judged based upon your relationship with other brothers and sisters. I'm a Judaizer. I love Israel more than I love the church. Well, I'm in good company. They said that about Jesus. And contrary to what I have been told, people coming into the group I'll give this story. I'm thinking about what I want to say and what I don't want to say, and But I had a pastor, and it's quite sad that a pastor, a guy with a PhD, and I'm not talking about a high school graduate, I'm talking about a PhD, came to me and said, I want to be a part of WCICC, but I can't join you because of your staunch support for Israel. You're blindly following Israel. Okay, again, I'm in good company. So does God. I was told by this individual that Jesus ceased being a Jew. He gave up Judaism, threw it away. I said, and? He became a Christian in order to find the church. Oh, I understand. So our entire interpretation in the church of the Messiah is completely incorrect for all the wrong reasons. And I'm not trying to sell you on who the Messiah is or isn't, but when we have an administrative leadership in the White House, if you want to call it that, I bounce back to Governor Jindal this morning, who said that he has disqualified himself from being commander-in-chief. We are not allowed to say Islam is the problem. Guess what? Islam is the problem. Whether he wants to admit it or not, I don't care. Our message to the church, and the reason why the number one realm of conversions is from Christianity to Islam, is because of ignorance. Because the people in the church are not being educated by the pastors. Now, before we blame the pastors, they're not being educated either, because they go to seminary, and in the process of going to seminary, they learn anti-Semitism. There are pastors and priests that come out of seminary today that you have a conversation with them, and I just wonder if we're in the same business. The effort of WCICC, the effort of proclaiming justice, has got to be to educate the people, because they simply do not know. They don't know that it's okay to be Jewish. They don't know, and I've been using the illustration of the wild branch that's engrafted into the tree. It's an olive tree, but we're supposed to be growing tomatoes. It doesn't work that way. We need to embrace our brothers and sisters. We need to embrace the Old Testament. Go home, take your Bible out of the closet, tear out that uninspired verse, or page, excuse me, the uninspired page called the New Testament. There is no break between the Old and New Testament. There is no difference between the Old and the New Testament. I hear pastors all the time say, oh, we don't do the Old Testament stuff. That's just crazy. We're a New Testament church. I don't know what that means, because you don't have a New Testament if you don't recognize the Old Testament. Your Messiah is a fraud. So you can't eliminate the Old Testament. I want to encourage you and encourage anyone who hears this message to get back into the book, get back into Scripture, get back into Torah. If you do nothing more than take the first 5 books of your Bible and read that, you would be amazed at how many people stand in a pulpit that have never read the book. It just amazes me. We're going to be working together with PJTN and developing a course that we're going to give away for free, because we think that every pastor needs to know who Israel is. Every pastor needs to know why they need to support it. It's not a political statement. It's a command that God gave us. It's not an option. What you do with your life may be an option, but what you do with Israel is not. You have an option from the standpoint of choosing a curse or choosing a blessing. The choice is yours. So I would highly recommend you get back into the book. highly recommend that you get educated and learn what your true relationship with Israel is.
Thank you, Dr. Lopoli. I would like to introduce you now to Ruth Lieberman with Jaffe Strategies. Ruth handles our trips to Israel. Ruthie, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Well, hello. First, really, thank you so much to PJTN, Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. I feel your partnership every day. I'm inspired anew whenever I think of what we can do together and what we have done, and get so excited about doing more and more. So thank you, Lori. I've come a long way. I've probably come longer than most people here. I'm here not to teach, but to share. I started out close by, kind of, in Ohio, grew up in a nice Jewish family, comfortable, had everything I thought I needed, but was raised by parents who said, go. Your duty in this world starts out by going. And you may have been born in the diaspora, but go, fulfill what you were taught, and live in the land. So I did, and my brothers did, and my parents have now, and my entire extended family, and I continue to raise a beautiful family of little Israeli children. They're not so little anymore, 5 of them. I moved to Israel and learned the language and learned the culture, got a little push here, learned how to use my Israeli chutzpah. And there we are, many, many people, and I'm sure that you all have friends, and I see good friends here, who live in Israel and who share the values with you. And I'm so inspired to see this room of Jews and Christians standing together and working for Israel. So I thank each and every one of you and everyone watching and listening to this. My oldest 2 girls are in the Army. They fight in the IDF. They're in the education unit, so they work with underprivileged people in the Army and try to help strengthen society. But my next kid is a boy. I'm not going to get too upset. And he's 16 years old. And last week, he got an envelope in the mail. He got a letter. And it had the IDF emblem on it. And I think there's a few people here who are already heroes of the IDF. But as a mother, this is new to me. And my 16-year-old son said, "Hey, Mom, guess what I got today?" He said it in English because our house is in English. And I said, "I don't want to know." And I wouldn't take that envelope in my hand. And I wouldn't look at it. And I looked at my boy and I said, "Okay, do you want a desk job?" He said, "No, I actually want to be a pilot." Okay, so we'll tune back in 2 years and see where he goes. But I'm telling you this because I want to share the personal side. When these illustrious experts, and I stand humbly by, talk to us about threats, I live fairly close to those threats. And I do believe that we're all in range of the threats, and I am listening and learning, and we know what awaits both Israel and America, and we know that Israel's fighting a fight that is absolutely U.S. interests. But what I do know as a mother and a political consultant and a person who is actually a settler, who, no horns, but a settler living in the biblical heartland, and I live south of Jerusalem, just between Bethlehem and Hebron. So we walk in the footsteps of our forefathers and our patriarch Abraham every day, and we are aware of that, and we feel blessed by that. But we live very close to some not so comfortable neighbors. And Lori asked me to share with you how that feels, both on the personal and professional level. I would say that life in Israel is good. Those of you who come often know that the sun shines, or we were snowed in for 2 days last week, but we'll skip that. And people go about their daily lives. My daily life is more political, and I work within the political parties, the Likud, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, and right now we're in an election campaign. That's another story. And we do pray and work for the people of Israel to follow their hearts and vote the right way and make sure that we continue to have a strong leader who will continue to tell the rest of the world that we have to stand together and do what's right. But my work and my life are intertwined, and I find that I want to share it. And what happens is I find someone like Lori, who is really a sister to me. I have a Christian sister with Jewish roots. And we share not only a love for Israel and a belief in doing what's right, but we share the passion. And I think she sleeps less than I do, I'm sure. And I think that we have found a common ground that we use to work to try to move hearts and minds. My direction is more political, and I find congressional leaders and try to introduce them to the Israeli leaders and try to talk about the things that we share in common, not to necessarily convince them, but to take your and mine, congressional leaders who already do believe. Many of them are Christian, and they're working out of a faith and a belief that they must do what's right every day and work for Israel and the United States interests. And they ask, what can I do? So I, with the help of people like Lori and PJTN, and friends in Israel, we spend a lot of time in the halls of Congress, and we talk about the issues that they could maybe move forward and try to make a difference. Yes, we try to mobilize our friends to attend Bibi Netanyahu's speech. You know, my goodness, is that really something we have to work on? It's almost embarrassing. I know here that you all agree, and I hope that the people of America realize that if the leader of a friendly ally, and probably the most friendly ally, comes to talk about a world threat, well, people should listen. What we do is we talk to our friends in Congress, and then we, as Lori and I tend to do, got a little antsy and said, well, let's do more. And we want to bring them to Israel. And we talk about the Bible, and we talk about walking in the homeland, and we talk about the proximity to Jerusalem and the inability to divide our capital city, and the way that the hills of Judea and Samaria overlook the coastal plains of 80% of Israel's population. And how on earth could we give that up biblically, strategically? Not to mention it's my home, and I don't really intend on moving. And I think that wherever Jews live in the land of Israel tends to bring more peace rather than less. And you see that from Gaza. So what we've done is we've started to bring those congressmen to Israel, leaders who've shown that they are dedicated to Israel and they believe the right path and they can understand the U.S.-Israeli relations. So we bring them to Israel, PJTN and my organization, Yes Israel Missions, and we try to share our love for Israel. We really don't have to educate them. You've sent some excellent representatives to Congress. And we share walking the land. We share speaking with the leaders. We do it all. And we send them back more educated. So PJTN and Yes Israel, we've worked together to develop a model that really tries to move people of faith who already do believe and want to do more. And it's just a wonderful opportunity for me to be here and share with you the idea that we can work together, that we are out there together. It often feels a little threatening. You feel a little lonely. You watch the TV, you read your internet, you say, wow, it's just me. It's not. It's all of us. And there are so many of you. And we in Israel, we not only appreciate it, we understand that we want to work together. So I thank you for the opportunity, proclaiming justice to the nations. And I do intend to continue not to sleep too much, to share with you all and to raise our children in safety in Israel and work for secure Israel. And more importantly, to remember that America is with us, next to us, together with us, and we're going to do this together. Thank you.
Ruthie, thank you for your comments. Yes, a secure Israel means a secure America. And our final panelist is Joel Richardson, author and also producer of his most recent film, Eyewitness. Joel.
Good morning. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for proclaiming justice to the nations, for inviting me to participate really in this important unified statement. So as Laurie said, I'm an author, a filmmaker, theologian, and I'm also involved in working with the persecuted church as well as the underground church throughout the nations. And one of my good friends is working with the underground church in Iran. So just this past week, he sent me a few pictures of really this massive mural that was just completed it's called Vali Asr Square. It's a very popular square in Tehran, in the nation of Iran, the capital of Iran. And what this mural portrays is a picture of the Islamic Messiah figure known as the Mahdi, or some of you have heard the term the 12th Imam. And it's a long line of men. So you have the 12th Imam. This is Islam's primary Messiah figure. And then behind the Mahdi is a man known in Islam as Isa al-Masih. This translates as Jesus the Messiah. And then you have a long line of the Ayatollahs and the various soldiers, if you will, of the Mahdi, of the Islamic Messiah figure. And essentially what it's portraying is that the Iranian government are the soldiers, are the foot soldiers of the coming Islamic Messiah figure, which they believe is soon to emerge on the earth. Now, for those of us who are not Muslims, we don't believe that there is such thing as the Mahdi. There's no Islamic Messiah figure that's going to come anytime soon. However, there's an important issue to recognize here merely from a geopolitical analysis of who we are dealing with in the Iranian regime. I'm sensitive to the optics of a Christian popular author who's participating in a press briefing with the ambassador, the esteemed Ambassador Bolton. And I think about how the mainstream media would demagogue such an event. If you Google my name, you'll get references from Media Matters referring to me as an end times prophet, having twisted some of my words, trying to portray me as a wild-eyed, apocalyptic Christian preacher. But here's the irony. Here's the irony. We have a government, we have a military in the earth who is 10 times more wild-eyed and apocalyptic than me. And while the mainstream media would go nuts, demagoguing and casting individuals such as myself as lunatics, our president, the man that we elected to lead us and represent us, has just capitulated to this government to give this apocalyptically guided government nuclear weapons. This is the age that we're living in. Now, there's this, let me say this as well. With regard to, I was recently doing a radio interview with the incredibly liberal radio station. In any case, I think it was NPR, yeah. And so they asked me, they said, well, wait a minute, now you're very concerned about Islamic apocalyptic belief and so forth, but aren't you concerned about Christian apocalyptic belief? You know, sort of to equate the two. It was very similar to the president's recent statement, you know, don't get up on your high horse now. There's a profound difference, and I want to make this, articulate this difference. Within biblical apocalypticism, the vision, as portrayed by the Bible, both the Old and the New Testament, is of a persecuted minority who receives divine deliverance. Their divine defender returns from heaven to deliver them from the oppression and the persecution of the raging Gentile nations. Okay? Within Islamic eschatological belief, they see themselves as the divinely guided aggressors. They don't see themselves as receiving divine defense in a passive sense. Their belief is profoundly active and aggressive. So their eschatology, their perspective on the end of days, is of them leading an aggressive campaign against both the Jews and the Christians. We are awaiting our divine defender to come forward from heaven. Now, and so I said to this interviewer, I said, listen, if a divine man does not burst forth from heaven, from the Christian perspective, you don't have anything to worry about. But from the Islamic perspective, not only do they have this aggressive, really violent end-time belief, they don't take the passive approach of Christians. And what I mean by passive is that our primary position as Christians is to pray with regard to the coming of the Messiah. We are praying. We don't hotwire the apocalypse, if you will. We're not trying to force the hand of God. We are awaiting him to send forward the Messiah. Muslims believe, whether it's the Iranian regime or obviously ISIS, they believe that it is their job to accomplish all that their end time perspective entails, whether or not their Messiah comes or not. They are to establish Islamic dominance over the earth, and if he comes and assists them, wonderful. If he doesn't, they're going to aggressively pursue this agenda regardless. So there's a profound difference between what we're dealing with. We stand at a moment where we have three profound witnesses really shouting, trumpeting to the earth in terms of how we should stand as moral individuals. I look back at we're just 70 years ago, the Holocaust. I look back at World War II, and I look at the statements that were coming out of Germany prior to the Holocaust. And yes, there was anti-Semitism. But I want you to consider this fact. The statements that were made against the Jewish people prior to the Holocaust were largely made behind closed doors. Yes, there were some anti-Semitic statements that were openly made. Today we live at a moment where statements are openly calling for genocide, not just from one nation, but from multiple nations, from multiple so-called religious men, from government leaders in multiple nations throughout the earth, in the very nations that surround Israel. Now it's spreading widely throughout Europe, and it's even infecting large sections of the church. 1,000 times worse today, the rhetoric, than anything that was being said at the onset of World War II. 1,000 times worse. We have the witness of recent history, what mankind is capable of. We have that, right in front of us to look at. We have the witness of, openly calling for genocide throughout the nations today. And we have the testimony of the biblical prophets warning us that there is a storm coming. And yet, by and large, overwhelmingly, the world is doing nothing about it. I read a story years ago. It was of a German man that was discussing living through the World War II. And he talked about looking out his window and seeing his neighbors being dragged out of their homes into the street. And the interviewer said, "Well, what did you do?" And he said, "We did what everyone else did. We closed the curtains and we walked away." We live in a moment in history where it is absolutely immoral to close the curtains and walk away. Immoral. As a Christian preacher, my message, our message, it's often referred to as the gospel. It means the good news. Now, if you look at this biblically, the good news is good news to the oppressed. It's good news to the poor, to the afflicted, but it's a message concerning something that throughout the Bible is called the day of the Lord. Okay? The day of the Lord is the day, and I want to be very clear, when a Jewish king comes back to judge the nations of the earth. All of mankind will stand before the judge. They will look into Jewish eyes, and they will be held accountable for the things that were done in this life, the deeds that they did in this life, whether good or bad. That day is coming, and while the gospel is good news to the poor, to the humble, to the oppressed, to the afflicted, to those who have transferred their trust from themselves into this Jewish Messiah, for those that have not done that, who have hardened their heart, and who have rejected their moral obligation to stand with the oppressed, the poor, the afflicted, the forgotten, the needy, which, by the way, biblically is always Israel, they will look into the eyes of a Jewish judge, and they will be held accountable for what they've done. That day is looming for all mankind. Let us not forget that that day is coming. Let us not be silent. I am a Gentile worshiper of the God of Israel. And I am awaiting the Jewish Messiah to come back as my deliverer, to deliver all of the oppressed of the earth who have put their faith in the God of Israel. as Christians, as we're called, again, those of us who have hitched our wagons, if you will, to the people of Israel, to the God of Israel, to the Messiah of Israel, to the coming reestablished kingdom of Israel, when the Jewish Messiah will come and sit on the restored throne of David. Those of us who call ourselves Christians, let us not separate ourselves from the root which gives us life, but let us stand and defend the root with our lives if necessary. Amen?
Thank you so much, Joel. That was wonderful and inspiring, despite all the negative things that we are facing today. You know, I just want to add a couple of scriptures. God reminds us through the prophet Joel that in the latter days he was going to pour out his wrath on the nations because they were dividing up his land. And who's leading the charge? The Christian nation, the Judeo-Christian nation, the United States of America. And why do we do it? Why do we sit back? Why do we close the curtains? Is it fear? Is it ignorance? Is it apathy? Whatever the reason, we are going to be judged. God also told the prophet Obadiah that in the last days he was going to wipe out the descendants of Edom because they stood by while their brother Jacob was held in captivity and they did nothing. As Joel said, we are going to stand before Almighty God. God brought us into the world for such a time as this. We didn't come a day too soon and a day too late. We came into the world, born to our parents, given the gifts and the talents that we all have that put us here today. And we can either choose to stand with God and defend his covenant, or yes, judgment, we will have to stand and give an account on Judgment Day. That's why you all are here today. You understand how critical this message is and why we have to communicate it to the Christian world. And there's no other place that I can encourage that than right here. I can't expect it from the mainstream media. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't need the mainstream media. We have the Christian media. We have members of the NRB because we still are the largest faith on the planet. But how are people going to know unless someone goes to tell them? That's your job. It's my job. That's why we're producing the documentary films, award-winning, to broadcast. That's why we're producing the Focus on Israel series to educate Christians so they'll know the truth, so they won't be swayed by what they hear in mainstream media. So now I want to move to the Q&A portion of this program, and I want to invite you. I'd like to get we're taping this program, so if you will please come up to the mic if you have questions, and if you'll address our panelists as to who you would like to answer that question, please. And we've got about 45 minutes to go, so we'll go ahead and start with Russ. Thank you very much.
Hi. Russ Jones, USA Radio Networks. Many believe that the threat of Islam, the Islamic terrorist threat, is the greatest threat to Western civilization as we know it, far beyond the social ills that challenge our communities that once we thought, same-sex marriage and abortion and whatnot, but this is far exceeded and elevated. My question would be, and I'm asking you to speculate a little bit, and that can always be dangerous, but in coffee shops across America, people are wondering about our leader, President Obama, and I'm asking you to consider this. Does President Obama knowingly either A, deceive us about the threat of Islam, or is he just simply misguided, or does he truly agree with what the Islamists are seeking to do? And I think people really do trying to find the answer to that, as we want to follow our leader, but it's sometimes difficult to follow our leader.
Who would like to answer that question?
I'll take a stab at it first. You know, honestly, I think the easiest answer is to recognize that the president went to Columbia and Harvard Law School. What else do you need to know? You know, the views that he holds are conventional wisdom in the faculty lounges of our great universities. We've simply had the misfortune that one of them has been elected president.
Next, Rabbi Hausman, you're silent on this one.
Oh, God. I just love it, Lori, when you call me out. You know, to me, it's all irrelevant. I think you have to really look at the context and milieu from which he comes, and his overriding ideology is very leftist. It's very, I mean, I would use the C word. I mean, communistic. I mean, it's and what he, and I would agree with the ambassador. Look at what he's been taught and socialized to believe. America's not a force of good. America needs to be cut down to size, and his actions just prove all of this. Whether he's Islamophilic, as Alan Westwood described it, I think is just irrelevant.
Yeah, you know, Rudy Giuliani has been taking a lot of heat lately for some comments that he's made. And I find it, when I look at Obama, if we look at the formative years, when I was, you know, between the age range of 8 to 12 years of age, I was organizing my friends on the street on 4th of July in the neighborhood to have a 4th of July Independence Day parade. We decorated our bikes. How many of you? Come on, there's more. There's got to be more than just me out there. See, I was a community organizer back then. But we were organizing 4th of July celebrations, celebrating our country. Where was Obama during those formative years? He was in Indonesia, listening to the wonderful call to prayer. Anyone else want to make a comment?
I'll just throw out a few things. You know, really, it doesn't matter because the end results are the same. Whether he's a Marxist, you know, closet Muslim, a homosexual, you know, all the various things that have been thrown, it doesn't matter. He's destructive to the Constitution. It's a corrosive relationship with Israel. And so, in a sense, it's a waste of time to try to figure out what's going on in the guy's heart. We've got 2 years left. He'll be out here soon enough, but in the meantime, we just need to put up the greatest resistance and let God address what's in his heart on the day of judgment.
He's been a very successful president. He said exactly what he was going to do, and he's done it.
Yep. Russ, I'm sorry, Bill.
Thank you, Lori. Bill Koenig, Koenig International. I just returned from 5 days in Jerusalem, and it was for the Council of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations. It was an excellent briefing. And I also want to throw in the fact I was at the EU Parliament in November to witness that. And these are some concerns I have that I hope the panel can address. Is number one is the lack of apathy. I mean, the fact that there is apathy in Israel right now. About 90% of Israel is not concerned with Iran, according to one of the briefings. The other thing that's crucial and critical right now is most people are focused on Iran developing weapons of mass destruction, but they are rapidly taking over country by country in the Middle East. They have control of 4 right now: Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. And they are also moving in on Libya and Sudan right now. These are smart, strategic, prophetic thinkers. They have, according to Uzi Rubin, who developed the Aero Missile Defense Program, they have mastered their short-range missile capability that puts every Sunni country that borders the Persian Gulf at risk. And obviously, Iran is moving in toward just north of Golan Heights. We saw a general taken out the other day. What's a general from Iran doing just north of the Golan Heights? So with all that said, and there are probably 2 strong voices about Iran. One is Ambassador Bolton. You've been consistent on this message for 4+ years. And the other one is the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. So with that said, the question is, what is it going to take United States, whether it's Congress, or who in the United States is going to be able to take on this White House and see something happen? We can get a lot of rhetoric, but we're not getting a strong voice here in America to go along with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right.
And what can we do? We need more John Bolton. So what would you suggest, Ambassador Bolton, or anybody else in this panel, to be a stronger voice? Because this problem, as you all know, is getting worse by the day, and the Iranians have positioned themselves brilliantly. They're chess players where the international community is playing checkers.
Well, I think the central responsibility in the United States rests, as it always does, with the American people. And the fact is, we have a president who is pursuing policies that the polls routinely show are not shared by a majority of the American people, specifically with respect to Iran, the Middle East, and the threat of international terrorism. You know, some members of Congress have stood up and spoken out. They've tried to oppose the policies. Many others have not. I don't fundamentally look for leadership on these issues anymore from the government in Washington. I look to the American people. And you know, the old saying goes, you get the kind of government you deserve. I hope that's not true, because I don't think we deserve the government we have. But I don't expect it to change. You know, there's no happy ending to that story. Except if the American people themselves get up and make their opinions known. So it's not a question, if I may just respectfully disagree, it's not a question of one or two people. I think it's a question of all the American people, and I remain optimistic because I think I know where their hearts are. But we need to get them to stand up and talk about these things. That's what I think PJTN does, and I think we just need a lot more of it on a lot of different fronts.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just to address your comments about the Israeli people, I am familiar with those figures and the people who met with you and discussed them with you. I think the flip side of the polls is that the people of Israel are more concerned with taking care of business than on relying on their allies. Whereas you might want them to know that Israel is being supported and U.S. will do anything that they need to do, Israelis will depend on themselves. And I just wanted to quote from the Prime Minister, and I believe he said this to your group also in a closed meeting where I was preparing for coming here and being in Washington also. He said, well, you know, there's an agreement that is supposed to be signed with Iran on March 24th. And supposedly it's secret. Well, think about it. The Iranians probably know what's in it because they're being asked to sign it. And the American government should probably know what's in it because they've proposed it. Now, you tell me, if the Americans know what's in it and the Iranians know what's in it, chances are we do too. So we were very, very reassured by our Prime Minister saying it directly. And his last comment was, and we'll do what we have to do. So when you talk about the Israeli people, I think you should just keep in mind the resolve and the idea that polls can be flipped and moved and put the numbers together any way you want to make a case. But I just wanted to say that the resolve of our Prime Minister is not dependent on what he sees coming out of the United States, and I feel very much secure in that knowledge.
The Prime Minister of Israel understands the purpose of Zionism very well. And that is that Jews would take their destiny, we take our destiny into our own hands, and we will be actors in history. We will not have history acted upon us. He knows it well. He learned it from his father. And I have no doubt that no matter what happens in Israel on March 17th, that the leadership will understand that basic lesson of Jewish history very well.
Let me throw one final statement as well. As Christians, as people of faith, I think it's also essential that we at least mention that despite all of the activism applying pressure to politicians, elections, all of these things. At the foundation of it, the most important thing that we cannot forget is to pray. Is to pray for wisdom for the leaders, for our leaders, for, you know, a million things. But let us not do anything without laying a foundation of prayer and calling on people of faith to lay a foundation of prayer for all that takes place over the next few months and over the next few years. If we miss that, all the political activism in the world is going to accomplish nothing.
I think it's very important that we realize what is going on and we become an active part of what's going on. I think the church is asleep. I see the church more like Lot than Abraham. They were in the midst of it, had no clue what was going on, Lot and his family. But Abraham knew. And I think we need to realize that the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. Be that our president or be that the prime minister of Israel. Here we have an election coming up very soon in Israel. And God's hand is all over it. He's not taken by surprise. And I think regardless of what happens, the person that is going to be nominated is going to be the person that God wants. And I think the same thing here in a year and a half when our elections take place. And so for me, it's going to be a matter of, like we said, we need to take an active part. We need to get people awake because I think they're totally asleep. And prayer is what it's going to take. We need to be more like the Abraham than Lot.
Thank you. Anyone else? Dr. Katz.
Dr. Shmuel Katz, Miami, Florida. Very much interested in education. First of all, I want to thank PJTN and the leadership of Lori Cardozo-Moore for an amazing job that it's being done through this organization. And I want to compliment the panel for a very clear and very focused report, which should wake up everybody. Now, my question is very specific, and it's very broad. We're fighting today for the hearts and minds, not only of our generation, but for the generations to come. It seems that we're losing the battle on the universities, we're losing the battle on the international arena, we're losing the battle in the media. The simple question is, what can we do about it, and how can we extend our outreach to the next generation to make sure that they learn the right way in order to act properly? The following statement is as important as everything else. It's not only the youth who are involved in this process. There are some things we cannot set aside. The United States government is providing hundreds of millions of dollars all over the world for educational programs. All those programs educating to hate America, it doesn't make any sense to me. What can we do to change it? And the third point is, we are reaching out to the population at large, and not only to Jews and Christians, because every person of goodwill across the globe has a vested interest in their own future, in the future of their children. Many of them are blind. They don't see that they are in big peril. What can we do to reach to them too, in order to make our world a better place?
Thank you. Would anyone like to start? Well, I will go ahead and take that question, Dr. Katz, and it's a very important one. Rabbi, could you hand me your textbook, just as an example? Sure. As I mentioned earlier, one of the initiatives of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations is to tackle the issue of our children's education. I think it's critically important as media and for the role that we play as PJTN in trying to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility through the medium of media, and in our situation, through our programs. There was a parent in Williamson County, which is the county that I'm from, who is a member of our organization. And we always wonder, do our stories, do our articles, do our films, do our programs really impact people? And you never really know until somebody actually responds. And here was one mother, Christian woman, who had homeschooled her children at the same time I was homeschooling mine, so the kids knew the Bible. She put her children in public school about the same time I put my children in public school, and her son comes home one day with a textbook that has a quote legitimizing killing Israeli teenagers in a Jerusalem restaurant because of Israeli government policies and army actions. And her son came home and questioned his faith. He asked his mother, who really has rights to the land of Israel? She says, well, what does the Bible say? You know. And he said, I know, Mom, but tell me the truth. Who really has rights to the land? When she heard that, she asked for him to bring her everything he was learning that day, instructional materials, handouts, textbook. She started going through it, and she contacted me and said, you will never believe what we're teaching our children in our schools. As I said earlier, we can continue to talk amongst ourselves, our generation, and fail to look at the long war. And that is the battle for the hearts and the minds of our children. But it comes through education. And the only way we're going to be successful in winning this battle is if more parents like Julie West stand up and challenge what's happening. We're seeing it happen across the country. It does work. We have to impact what's happening on our college campuses, which PJTN and there are other organizations that we're working with. I think it's 17 other organizations, 22 other organizations, Christian and Jewish, who are collaborating together. We're pooling our resources and we're putting pressure on people. We just had an incident here at Vanderbilt University. Some of you who are on my mailing list got the email about the professor, a law professor, who's not just your average law professor, he teaches constitutional law. Reminds me of the president. He was a constitutional law professor too. But he challenged and threatened to try to shut down a pro-Israel rally we hosted right out here in front of the hotel a couple days ago. It's ludicrous. But unless somebody challenges him, and now he's getting a lot of flack, we organized a campaign. We put out press releases. We started drawing attention to educate the people, to educate our sphere of influence. And the people, just like Ambassador Bolton said, he has faith in the American people. And yes, the people responded. But because they were informed that there was an issue, just like Rabbi Hausman, you would not believe what they're doing in Boston. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter if it's Tennessee. These textbooks may have a different cover, but they're the same textbooks. We're fighting an issue right now in Seminole County, Orlando, Florida, that just recently came up. Because they have there's a textbook, a Pearson published textbook, the same textbook that had the anti-Semitic quote. There were 68 books in this history class that had the first 100 pages ripped out of the textbook. Well, those first 100 pages had Judaism and Christianity, the history, in it. And guess where chapter 10 started? The chapter on Islam. Imagine that. So when the parent who's been involved, who has contacted us to help them wage their battle, PJTN is going from county to county now, but the parent, when they challenged the school, the principal, the teacher, said, where are these pages? Oh, it was a manufacturing printing defect. Really? We just found, as I mentioned, another publisher admitting that they're minimizing, removing Judaism and Christianity from their history textbooks. This is a growing problem. If you look at Pearson, Pearson has, the Libyan government owns 26 million shares of stock in Pearson textbooks. But getting back to your question, Dr. Katz, the only way we're going to reverse this is if we fight this battle on two fronts. It's the near war and it's the far war. Because as I said, no matter what we do here, if we keep preaching to the choir, to our generation, we're going to be in trouble. We have to demand accurate textbooks. We have to demand that CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, is not producing instructional materials for our children, and it's happening. 7th grade textbooks. And they're targeting these 7th graders because psychologists also know that 7th grade is a big transitional year in development. That's when kids really start absorbing things, and they know. They've been at this game a lot longer than we have. We have a lot of work to do, but it starts by education. Yes. The reason why we were successful in Tennessee, we have a total of 95 counties in Tennessee because of our initiative. We have 50 counties with parents and citizens we've been able to mobilize that are in preparation for filing a request to remove these textbooks from their county schools. It has to happen by the masses. That's how we're going to change. We've got to affect what's happening. We've got to challenge, just like what's happening with Vanderbilt. We had Professor Swain here, who is being targeted by Vanderbilt University because of some comments she made. But Professor Rubin, he's not being challenged for threatening, as a constitutional law professor, threatening to shut down my right to assemble and my right to free speech. It's absurd. Is there anyone else who would
Sure.
like to weigh in?
Sure. I think one of the big problems is, in one sense, we're tired, because what we're doing is we're handing the education over to someone else. I think it all comes back to the Shema, training the next generation. We're supposed to be talking about this when we're sitting in our house, when we're walking on the road, when we're lying down, and when we're rising. But we have, if we turn our kids' education over to someone else, and we're not doing what we're told to do, that's where a lot of the problem comes. We need to take the responsibility, even though we're tired or whatever. We have to invest in the next generation, and they have to know our level of commitment. I mean, if we're not educating our own kids, and they think that it's okay just to learn, if we're just turning them over to someone else to educate them, and we're not taking that responsibility by not doing it, I think that's where a lot of the problem is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes.
What you're saying is absolutely the answer is to the next generation.
Yes.
But I think that we have to realize that we have some tools in our toolbox that we should be taking advantage of and really making them work for us. So if we're here and we're at the NRB and we're talking to friendly media and people who realize their responsibility, I think we all have to realize that words count.
Yes.
And in Israel, we've worked on, I suggest that you look it up, PMW, Palestinian Media Watch, where they're watching and listening and translating what's being said in Arabic on official stations. And I'm glad that people are nodding, because it means that you know that you have this really excellent resource, and we thank them for that. The other thing is in your hands is the word that you choose to say as you describe the situation. So I know here we are preaching to the choir, but I feel that I have to remind myself not to say militant, to call them terrorists. Don't be afraid to tell it like it is. Don't fall into the New York Times trap of trying to feel really PC and making everyone look like they all want to live happily ever after together.
Right.
And if they don't, and if they are terrorists, then call them that. The other example for semantics would be choosing to how you educate, and you have a 2-minute piece where people are watching on TV or listening on the radio. You have to be able to take advantage of that and tell it like it is. Do not be afraid. If you want to discuss Israel, then don't just throw out, oh, two-state solution, because maybe that would be leaving us in a paradigm that doesn't lead to peace and keeps us in war. Leave it up to the people to understand what you're saying is a dangerous game. You need to be able to educate. And if you want to use the terms West Bank, well, go ahead, but say what it is. Say where it is. Talk about Jerusalem. Don't just throw out East Jerusalem. All of these things are things that you already know, and that's not a lecture in the details, but use your words and choose them wisely so the semantics can really help our battle.
Yes.
I also just want to mention that part of the success in our textbook initiative, which is far from over, there's 76 textbooks that have to be removed from Tennessee schools that we were not happy with. But our success came as a result of launching a media campaign. We were strategic in when we launched it. We did it 2 months before school was going to let out, and then we started putting out press releases. I was doing radio and television interviews all over the country. And we did it 2 months. We targeted not just the superintendent who refused to remove the textbook from the school, but we also targeted Pearson publishers. And we hammered them in the press. And some of you may have seen the interview on Fox and Friends that we did. The story ran for about 2 weeks. And we're still keeping Fox informed about the progress on that so that they can pick it back up at a later time. But this is what happened to Pearson. Now keep in mind, Pearson is the largest textbook publishing company in the world. 60% of their sales come out of the United States of America. Their mission statement, and they sell textbooks to schools all over the globe. This is not just America. Their mission statement says it's to change the way America thinks. So what's the matter with the way we think? But Pearson, 6 months after we strategically launched their campaign, knowing that come June, schools were going to be looking for textbooks to purchase. So if we put out a bunch of negative information about Pearson and the propagandizing of our children through their textbooks, it was going to affect their sales. And by October of that same year, Pearson's stock was reported going down, Bloomberg News. And by January of the following year, Pearson was laying off employees in North America. That's the impact that media has on our society. There are good people, but the good people don't know what's happening. And so we bought airtime on our local conservative talk shows for 2 weeks. We ran 5 shows a day, or 5 commercials a day, 5 days a week. And we were giving parents examples of what was in those textbooks. And we increased our numbers on our website. We had people signing petitions, and we were able to affect the way textbooks are adopted and evaluated in the state of Tennessee just from that effort. We mobilized the masses. Once we started digging into the anti-Semitic quote, we didn't just find anti-Semitism. We found anti-Judeo-Christian, anti-American, pro-Islamic rhetoric, propaganda being fed to our children.
Lori, may I?
Yes.
You know, my friends, there's a word in Arabic for this. I'm probably the only Arabic speaker here. No? Okay, there's a word in Arabic for this. You all know it, by the way. It's called jihad. Now, when I say jihad, what you most often think of is, I don't know, maybe those 70 to 100 Assyrian Christians who were abducted yesterday. But you should know that according to the great historian of Islam, Bat Yaor, in her seminal books, The Decline of Eastern Christianity Under Islam, as well as From Jihad to Thimitude, she writes, and it's taken right from the Umdat al-Salik, the Reliance of the Traveler, that jihad can be waged by peaceful means. And it means proselytizing, it means propagandizing, and it means corrupting those texts that are used, that you see in the school districts and whatnot. Look, my daughter, not to share a war story, but I'll tell you one. My daughter was in Jewish day school through 8th grade, and then we moved her over to public high school for a couple of good reasons. One not good reason, but a couple of very good reasons. And, you know, we Jews are a people of history. So I wasn't so much interested in what was taking place in the science courses and the math courses, well, except for Common Core, because then 2 plus 3 can equal 11, depending upon how somebody feels, okay? Why are you laughing? That happens to be true, okay? But, you know, English and history, oh my God. And it got to a point where my wife would not attend a parent-teacher conference with me because I was just in the faces of the English teachers and, in particular, the history teachers. Example, did you know that Truman's decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was immoral? Not a dialectic question. Was it moral or immoral? It was immoral. Okay, my daughter is now a sophomore in college. This is being taped, right? Okay, so I won't tell you where, but trust me, she's in college, doing nicely. The superintendent of the district called me this past September about an issue relating to the Jewish calendar. And I just made this flip remark after we took care of business. I guess you're glad that I no longer have any kids in the school district because you don't see me running in. And I'm telling you, every time that I would walk through the door into the superintendent's wing or the high school principal's wing, they would run for cover. Okay? Here's the sad comment. When a superintendent of a district says to a parent, geez, I wish you still had a kid in because we need somebody here to hold teachers accountable. What kind of statement is that? You know, what kind of abdication has taken place in school districts and and it's not just within school committees, it's on library committees, it's on boards of selectmen, at least by our government in New England. I don't know how you do it down here. You know, where are people? Where's responsibility? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And until Western society regains reason and discernment and faith in a loving God and citizenship as a privilege with attendant duties, you won't have a clear understanding of what you're fighting for. And if you don't know what you're fighting for, then it's difficult to energize any kind of patriot, however you want to define that word patriot. But it'll be very difficult to energize patriots to battle.
And the patriots are arising because as a result, even of education, we ended up having not just the state of Tennessee, but also Florida, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Washington State contact us to help them organize and mobilize their counties. We can do it. We need to fight it locally, though, because that's where we're going to win the battles. It doesn't take as many votes to remove these. And by the way, we did tell our school board that if you do not remove this textbook from our children's schools, we will remove you from office. And we mobilized as citizens, and we did. We changed the whole fabric of that school board. So, Dr. Katz, that's the long answer to your question. The bottom line, from my perspective, is the only way we're going to take back the funding, we've got to take back local control of our schools again. And as Pastor Mark was saying, we have abdicated that responsibility and left it to the schoolhouses. My kids are in public school, but I'm actively involved in their education. I'm wanting to see what they bring home. But then when I see things that are being communicated to my children that are inaccurate and that are biased and do not reflect our values, then I'm there at the school or the superintendent's office demanding that it be changed. One of the things that we're trying to do now in Tennessee is to remove all of those textbooks from our state legislature. That's going to be a feat in itself because everybody keeps telling me, oh no, this costs too much money. We can't do this. Well, then put the responsibility back on the textbook publisher. They provided a textbook that is ineffective. It's historically inaccurate, it's biased, and what were we doing spending in Tennessee over $3 million on textbooks for our children when you have highly defective material? I think that's the way we're going to fight it and challenge our elected officials. But it's going to be an uphill battle because everybody's cutting back their budgets and saying, you know, we don't have any money. We've got to cut all these departments and cut all the spending.
This is true also for the allocation of funds on the international arena. For instance, the U.S. is providing a lot of money for educational systems through the UN and through the Arab countries themselves, and they still educate against the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Bolton, do you want to comment on the UN's influence or its impact on our education, the globalization of American schools?
No, I think that we need a complete and thorough review of all of our foreign assistance programs, not least of which the money which goes through multilateral organizations, because we have so little influence in many of these organizations that although they may have started years ago with good intentions, we've just lost our ability to monitor what they're actually doing. But our bilateral assistance programs need a complete review as well, especially after 8 years of the current administration. So I think this is a huge task. I think we've got a cultural problem in the State Department. It's existed for decades. It'll require a cultural revolution to fix at some point. But I think what you've indicated is certainly the most visible, most troubling aspect, that taxpayer dollars are actually being spent in ways that Congress has not provided adequate oversight over, that the executive branch hasn't, and that people would be appalled by if they knew what was happening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Allie.
Good morning. I'm Allie Turner with Athens Now, and I also volunteer with PJTN. And unlike Lori, when I was 8 to 12 years old, I was considering the fact that as a left-handed girl, I needed to organize the left-handed people of the world because we were the oppressed minority that were being forced to use right-handed desks in public school. So I do understand being a product of the kinds of university situations that you're talking about, because my sisters were baby boomers born in the mid-40s and attended college in the 60s and radicalized me completely. Ruthie, you will find it probably more than amusing that I attended Oberlin, and at the time we considered ourselves to be Kent State in exile. Then I had a head-on collision with Yeshua HaMashiach. I have been in his ICU ever since, and on most days his nurses will tell you that I'm making some decent progress. So here is my question. We've all been given a voice here. Some of us very large voices, very grand voices, some of us less so. But starting with Ambassador Bolton, if you were a person who did not have a voice in this classic sense, if you were an average bear dad or an average bear mom, Ruthie, what would be the most important thing that you would feel you could do to make a difference to defend Israel?
Well, I think a lot depends on your particular circumstances, but honestly, given what we see today with the worst government-to-government relationship that we've had since the State of Israel was created in 1948, Americans really have the responsibility to do what they can about their government. And, you know, I think most people want to go about their daily lives. They want to tend to the affairs of their family and their work and their faith. Most people really don't want to get involved in politics, and I fully understand that. The trouble is, on the other side, you have people whose whole lives are politics. Everything they do is politics. And they see everything through a political prism. And if you allow that to go unchecked, you get the result we have today, and it will get worse, too. So I'm afraid that people need to take some percentage of their time, some percentage of their ability to divert from their primary responsibilities to defend the larger interest. And I think the answer really comes down to the answer of how do you do well in life, how do you do well in a marriage, how do you do well in almost anything. You have to work at it. It just takes more work. There's no magic bullet. Nobody should operate under the presumption that there is. That's what we need. People have to get involved. That's why many of you are here. You need to get your neighbors involved, and one brick at a time, we can make a difference.
Amen. I want to just recognize that Ambassador Bolton has to catch a flight, so we're going to go ahead and dismiss him here. We want to thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom with us.
My apologies to all of you. I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
Could I respond to that, too?
Absolutely.
I think one of the main things that people can do is get involved. A lot of it's time. You can volunteer even. There's a great Jewish organizations like AIPAC or Stand With Us. And so for me, the main thing is education. Educate yourself. Get involved by volunteering for different organizations like PJTN or, pro-Israel organizations. And then, of course, your prayer, finances, vote. I mean, there's a lot of ways that, the normal person can just be involved.
So we can cut back on our football, and so Dancing with the Stars. Okay. Ruthie, did you want to answer Allie's?
No, you just caught me saying I don't want to cut back on my football. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, Cleveland
Go Browns.
Browns.
One more thing you could do, it just wasn't on your list, I'm sure you do it, is to speak out and to write out. And we're here in media, and I really am the pusher. to say, speak out. If you read an article and you get angry, then leave a comment at the end. And if you have to register, so do it. Just write those comments and then share it with your friends and then tell someone to get a little angrier and write a letter to the editor. And if you get really angry, yes, write an editorial and share it and send it out and do more and more, because really, if you look at, I guess Facebook is kind of for old people now, but I don't know what else they're on, Instagram. But if you look at all the different ways that we have to create materials and then share it so widely, it doesn't matter where you are. I can be talking to you and it looks like we're living next door to each other. That's what we've got to get going.
Okay, so we've got 8 minutes left, so we've got a couple more questions before we break up. Thank you, Allie.
We ran across a situation where I got an email from a public school principal informing me that they were allowing prayer for a group. They didn't say what it was at like 3 o'clock every afternoon or 2 o'clock in the school, and it troubled one of the teachers. The email said, we've given it to the Christian radio station. You might do something about it, but I'll get fired if they find out who I am. Would you not use my name? I called a pastor in the school district and said, could you find out what's going on? He said he didn't know anything about it. He had tried. I didn't like the way he didn't come back, so I called another pastor. And I said, would you find out something about this? Within a half hour, he called me back and he said, where was this at? He said, I'm at the school right now. And sure enough, they were having a Muslim prayer service for the students, but the principal didn't even know about it. And they went to the principal. The principal went down the hall and found out there was truth to it. Then the next day, I got a hold of a school board member because nobody seemed to know where it came from. I hid the name of the person, but I showed the assistant principal's name that the communique come out on, which he had lied to the school and told him he didn't know anything about it. Then we get another call on a story hidden in the paper of a different town than what we're in, of a diversity club that's started in one of our public schools. I went to all the pastors in the town that had no idea about it.
Right.
And we opened those things up as well. So we've got a lot of flack for doing that kind of stuff. I'm not a well-liked guy in the area that I'm at because I've challenged everything. Oh, by the way, I'm from Sky High Broadcasting, Joplin, Missouri.
Okay.
And but the question I like to have anybody here ask is, we hear about these freedom fighters that were in Syria that were taking on the Assad regime, but is that not the same bunch that's ISIS? Did we not fund that and those freedom fighters? Did they not turn in to? Did we not fund ISIS to start? That's my question.
Compliments of the U.S. taxpayer and the Obama administration's policies,
Sure.
absolutely. Is there anyone who'd like to take this question quickly? Because we do have David's waiting for a question as well. I will say to you that the Obama administration's policies have been very clear. We look at the State Department, and the State Department is evidence to Obama's policies. And from education to immigration, whatever it is, it's all part of that whole mindset. When I went to meet with the staff of Senator Corker's foreign relations team in Washington, D.C. a couple years ago, and during the meeting, this was at the beginning of the Christian persecution, when Christians were starting to be targeted in these areas, and they all happened to be targeted in the same areas that the Obama administration had been in previously and changed our policies. We helped remove Gaddafi, Mubarak. I mean, every place this administration went, he created chaos. And who was being slaughtered but Christians? And Israel's security was being jeopardized, whether it was Tunisia, whether it was Libya, whether it was Egypt, Syria, Iraq. It's because of his policies. And again, it comes back to what Ambassador Bolton said. Unless we as Americans, as patriots, take on this issue and confront it. And I've had former military call me in various cities that I speak at. I've had former FBI. And I've had a current FBI agent contact me, give me information. Unless we stand up and they're telling us, tell the people everywhere you go, this is how we're going to defeat these terrorists. It's not going to be on a battlefield. They're not going to fight a war with America because they can't win. But what they're doing in our schools, it's like what Rabbi said, silent jihad.
Yep.
They're doing it because we have there was a vacuum created because Christians left the education world.
Yep.
We said, oh, we're not going to get involved because that's education, it's too liberal, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, look what we have. So now it's time to push into that and change it.
If I may, it's not just under this current administration. You find slip-ups with the Bush administration, and while I am hardly left of center, I'm not left of center at all. I'm right of center on, as my mother-in-law likes to say, on everything. But listen, the Bush administration was not good with this. The Clinton administration was hard with this. This goes back several administrations, my friends. Okay? You know, it's not simply the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, you better know what their doctrine is. You better know what their doctrine is. And one of the reporters mentioned this. While they're playing chess, we're playing checkers. It's even worse than that. All right? We're playing tiddlywinks.
Yeah.
Let me say something real quick too. There's another sort of larger element to the whole discussion. Obviously, there's the education on the local level, and you know, politics is not my primary purview. But I just want to throw this out. Maybe someone will pick up on it and run with it. The Saudi royal family, the Saudi government, has engaged over the past 40 years on the largest propaganda effort in human history. The amount of money that they've put forward to build the Islamic centers, to build the mosques, to train the hate preachers, to send out the radical Islamic missionaries all over the world, $20 million to Harvard, $20 million to Georgetown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not only that, it's tens and sometimes, tens of millions of dollars in the back pockets of every single president, both when they're in office and when they get out. Virtually every major senator, politician of note, after they get out, they are put on some sort of a board or this or that. I believe that as conservatives, we need to set up an organization of accountability that actually calls on the next incoming conservative or Republican candidate to make a vow that after office they will not receive a single penny from the Saudi royal family. And this is the great taboo of Washington. Everyone talks about the evil Israel lobby. No one talks about the Saudi lobby. And I'm not talking about the popular craft store, the Saudi lobby. This is one of the great corrupting forces in the earth. So you got to lighten it up sometime. One of the great corrupting influences because it comes down to every little issue in politics. The pipeline from Canada. Why do we not want to wean ourselves off of Middle Eastern oil independence? What's behind all of that? And tens of millions of dollars affects decisions, and people don't give away tens of millions of dollars for no reason. So we need to recognize the Saudi influence on American political process and stand against it. It's another big part of the component of the issue.
Read Mitchell Bard's book, The Arab Lobby. A lot of this is discussed in there. And I will also tell you that since we're about to enter a presidential election cycle, you need to take a look at where candidates get their monies from, who's donating, and if a candidate will not just spill it out all there, I would suggest that it's not a candidate you want to consider pulling the lever for.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, David.
Lori, awesome. Panel, excellence personified. David Sagal, Ministry of Jewish Relations, United Pentecostal Church International. On the Pentecostal front, we have entered our Board of Governors and our Extension Bible colleges, been able to, our president is Jewish in heritage. We're able to change the narrative on our lessons and education process there. Our regular colleges are using some of our curriculum now. And then our graduate school next year is going with us to Israel on a family trip. And I think Ruthie's going to help us with some political activism that way. We're using the Jabotinsky model to political activism, getting the youth motivated, and then, of course, raising up an army of grassroots people. I really feel like through regional seminars and partnering with IMOT, we've been able to effectively win the battle with politically accurate, biblically based forefront in that area and in our denomination. However, on the evangelical front, which I am very much involved in interdenominationalism, Chicago-based, we're facing Wheaton with Gary Burge. We're facing Lynn Hybels, Willow Creek. And so you see the David and Goliath issue that I'm facing in that regards. And then occasionally we get a drop in from Stephen Sicer. Anglican bishops are countering that. We've dialogued with them. We've even converted some of them. We baptized a few in the Jordan River in the name of Yahashua HaMashiach at Nazareth. They received the Holy Spirit. Beautiful situation there, bishop in Jerusalem. That's our counterbalance, but it's so distant. Going back to the other aspect, the money that's in Willow Creek, a force. And then Gary Burge, so as we dug deeper into the situation, found that he is, as Joel said, receiving some Islamic funds from Saudi Arabia to fund his foundation. We have found the president of Wheaton is intimidated because Gary Burge had the previous president removed for standing for Israel and against Gary. And then, of course, the student body's intimidated. We can't get on campus. And the pastors for 15 miles around will not host anything in their area because they're afraid their denomination will silence them or defrock them. Ultimately, this is my question. In this aspect, how are you helping to stop funding in that area, challenge the administrations that are housing these professors that are anti-Semitic, and I say that liberally, and then, of course, how can we fully expose those groups that are funding them so that we can somehow stop this? PJTN, you're the expert. How do we do this?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked that question, and there's a lot to tackle there, but we've got to wrap up this because there's another press conference coming in after us. But I will tell you, what we are doing, David, is we're going to expose them. The next documentary, did you see the trailer last night? Were you there with us last night? You saw the trailer on BDS? Well, our next documentary film is going to expose the BDS movement for what it is, and we're also going to tar and feather these Christian organizations who are taking millions of dollars. In fact, Hobby Lobby, I don't know if you all know this, has been one of the biggest funders of the documentary films to counter our message. Hobby Lobby, Mark Green, all of you need to call Mark Green and ask him for a quote on this, and ask him why he is funding pro-Palestinian propaganda films that are anti-Israel, anti the covenant of God. But we are going to expose them. That's how it's going to change. We have to start talking about Gary Burge. I couldn't even get it in. I tried to do an interview with him a couple of years ago. He says, I'm not going on camera with you. I'm well written on this issue. Read my books. I'm like, thank you very much. I know where you stand. Right. It's also Hobby Lobby that's funding the Christ at the Checkpoint. They gave $100,000 to promote propaganda by pastors like Gary Burge, like Stephen Sicer. So this is a problem. We have got to confront the church. And we've got to hold Christian leaders accountable for their position and ask them where, if you're going to teach the flocks, thousands of Christians, millions of Christians, depending on who their audience is, if you're going to teach them this stuff, what scripture are you standing on to make your case? Because they will be, and they have to be exposed, because they will be exposed one day, and one day they're going to have to stand, as we talked about earlier, before God's throne of judgment.